And thanks for the time here on PM Express. On the show tonight, we're going to look at the COVID-19 economic plan that the finance minister presented to the House Parliament yesterday. A fundamental question that must be answered on the back of what was presented yesterday is the cure worse than the virus? Where do we stand tonight? We know that Ghana has a confirmed COVID-19 case currently of 161 and climbing. We've been warned already by the experts that we can expect this number to go up. And so we aren't at the peak yet. We can expect that to happen. Do not panic. It's what the curve and the experts predict before it gets better. 31 out of the number, and this is the good news, 31 out of the number have been treated and discharged. And so there is some good news in the midst of the gloom and doom. This is good news for our fight. 5 deaths have been recorded. It hasn't changed. 5 deaths, we had 5 deaths 3 days ago, and it has stayed the same. We're hoping more people will recover in the next few days as well, just to give us a bit more of some good news in this gloom and doom. Now, the country is currently under, as we know, a 2-week partial lockdown because it affects 2 places in particular in the country. Greater Accra and the Greater Kumasi metropolitan areas have been affected by this lockdown. The finance minister went to Parliament yesterday and put forward a plan because this is going to affect a lot of people, as we've seen across the globe. Parliament in the last 8 hours, we understand, has approved a loan facility to the tune of 527.8 million euros to support the country's healthcare infrastructure. This is part of what the finance minister presented to the House, which he says this is how much it's going to cost us as far as deploying the health infrastructure required to win this battle. And so we're getting this approved by Parliament. Also, the House has also approved the disbursement of 2.3 billion cedis for the NHIs for 2020. This is key. If you're not well and you go to an NHIS accredited facility, if this particular amount hasn't been cleared, you're going to have a challenge getting the healthcare you require. And that is why government is making moves to get that plugged as soon as possible. Now, Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta has disclosed the coronavirus spread will cost the economy 9.5 billion Ghana cedis in 2020 fiscal year alone. And that is a huge figure that, of course, is going to be something that we're going to be paying attention to tonight. How do you plug that particular hole? 9.5 billion is a significant figure that, of course, we will have to somehow deal with. He says the virus will reduce projected GDP growth from 6.8 to about 1.5. That is a big deal. And so he's proposing a few measures to deal with this. Government is expected to lay in Parliament a 1 billion Ghana cedi COVID-19 alleviation program to try and deal with the gloom that I've just described for you, the economic gloom that I'm describing for you, that the finance minister himself laid in Parliament, mincing no words. $100 million inflows into the economy from international agencies and stabilization fund to help cushion the economy. Also is going to go to Parliament. Now, a stimulus package has also been announced to cushion the local industry. He says some of the money would also come from the Heritage Fund. I want to go into detail as far as this is concerned very shortly, because this is where our focus is going to be, the Heritage Fund conversation, but also the list of things the finance minister is saying. I want to quickly go through for you what the finance minister had said in terms of the key measures, if you haven't seen them already. The finance minister is proposing to do a few things. One, lower the cap on the Ghana Stabilization Fund, and that is a key thing. Lower the cap on the Ghana Stabilization Fund from a current 300 million to 100 million, so they can spend from it more than we have ever done before, and so that is key. 2, arrange with the BOG to defer interest payments on non-marketable instruments estimated at 1.2 billion cedis to 2022 and beyond, and so that is key. There's going to be a deferment of this non-marketable instrument, adjust expenditure, and that is a very important point, because I've heard many say in the wake of what the finance minister presented, that one of the key things to do is to cut what you've already planned to spend. The finance minister says he is going to do exactly that. He is going to cut expenditure on goods and services and capex downwards by 1.2 billion cedis. That's how much he is willing to cut. But they're also planning to secure the World Bank DPO of 1.7 billion cedis as well. Also, we are going to return to the IMF and also get the IMF Rapid Credit Facility. That is worth an estimated 3.1 billion. That's a lot of money, cedis, by the way. 3.1 billion cedis from the IMF Rapid Credit Facility. We need that. It's urgent. The finance minister says to Parliament. Also, reduce the proportion of the net carried and participating interest due GMPC, and that is also very, very key, from 30% to 15%. So 15% of that amount will come back to government to spend in this time of great need. Now, the big one, amend the Petroleum Revenue Management Act to allow the withdrawal from the Heritage Fund. The Heritage Fund is a fund we've set aside into which we put monies we're making from oil for future generations. In this time of crisis, the finance minister says we want to amend the law so we can withdraw from that fund that we have put aside for future generations to undertake emergency expenditures in periods of national emergency. Now, we are estimating, and we have in the Heritage Fund an estimated $591 million. That's dollars, by the way, $500 million in that the government wants to touch in this time to cushion you. There have been many concerns with all this, including what the minority has been saying, that kick against the touching of the Heritage Fund. It's key for the minority. They believe if it's for future generations, leave it for them. They also suggested government should make use of the NADMO Fund instead of the Heritage Fund. We'll explore that tonight on the show. So the key question to ask, unprecedented measures that the finance minister had introduced yesterday, is the cure that he's proposing worse than the virus? You want to stay with us for this? 11 p.m. Express tonight. My guest joining me via Skype tonight is Executive Director of the Africa Center for Energy Policy, Mr. Ben Boakye, is joining me via Skype. Also joining me tonight via Skype is of course, the head of ISODEC, who's also been very instrumental, used to be with the PIAC, and has been the forefront of this when it comes to the oil and gas sector. You know him, Dr. Steve Mateo, is also joining me via Skype. Doc and Ben, thank you very much for joining us here on PM Express. Also joining us tonight via phone is a minorities rep, one of the reps on the Finance Committee, Mr. Adongo, is also joining me on the phone. Mr. Chima Boakye is the majority rep on the Finance Committee, also joining me on phone. But I want to start with you, Ben, on a quick reaction first of all to the raft of measures I just detailed that the Finance Minister has announced in Parliament yesterday. Most of that is on the oil and gas sector, touching the Heritage Fund, capping the Stabilization Fund. What's your reaction to that?
Let's rather go back. Fortunately, I'm trying to talk to somebody before me. It's just that I'm not hearing the person now.
Let me see if we can hear. Let me see if we can bring in Dr. Steve Mateo, if we can hear me and if we can hear him. Dr. Mateo, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Fantastic. Your reaction then to the measures that has been announced. We'll try and fix the line with Ben Boakye shortly so we can bring him in. Your reaction, Dr. Mateo?
Well, the measures that have been announced by the president are quite elaborate. and I will describe them as prudent and the right thing to do. But I also make the observation that the desperate situation that we find ourselves is actually something that could have been avoided if we have kept faith with the letter and spirit of the Petroleum Revenue Management Act.
I mean, if you look at, let's start with the specifics. Let's start with the most controversial one, the Ghana Heritage Fund withdrawal. What's your reaction to that? Is that something that merits the crisis we're in?
You know, by proposing to raid the Petroleum Heritage Fund amounts to treating it as a contingency fund. Mind you, funds are actually established for specific purposes. And for the purpose in which we find ourselves today, we have a fund to deal with it, which is the contingency fund. Question is, how have we treated the contingency fund? We require that the assets over stabilization fund, the CAP, is distributed into the sinking fund and contingency fund. Over the years, what we have done is to ignore the contingency fund and put money into the sinking fund, and in the process, feeding into our appetite to borrow and creating a huge debt problem. We did not put money as required by the PRM into the contingency fund. There's no doubt, therefore, that we will find nothing or very little in the contingency fund to deal with this specific situation.
So that is a key point. But I need to ask that question again. I mean, I see your point about we haven't done enough with the contingency funds, etc. Where do you stand on, is it appropriate, looking at the gravity of the crisis, to touch the Heritage Fund now? Is there a justification in the coronavirus pandemic to touch it? What do you say?
There is no justification to touch that money.
Interesting.
I believe we can do without touching the Heritage Fund. The situation we find ourselves, and the President describes it as that we are in times that are not ordinary. So that calls for cost-cutting measures. We've seen some attempts on the part of government, but they are not far-reaching enough. We're looking at cutting the cost of government bureaucracy further and suspending all major infrastructure projects. They can wait. Once we survive, we can go back to those infrastructure projects. But funds that have been established for future generations, and I heard my friend Mr. Otin Bache on that station suggesting that the future generation is now. No. The future generation, according to international best practices and the spirit of the letter and the letter of our law, refers to that generation that by the time they are born will not need our oil endowment. Our only proof that once upon a time we had oil in this country will be the Petroleum Heritage Fund. And again, the law says that we cannot touch this fund 15 years after its establishment. That is only when we can touch it. So we cannot touch it until 15 years after its establishment. Laws are meant to be easy. And if at the least inconvenience, you are going to change the rules, then you are not a serious nation. when you haven't done other things that be done to get out of the situation. So the point I'm making here is that the Heritage Fund cannot be our first line of defense.
Now, let me bring in, let's see if we can hear, have we fixed the line with Mr. Boache? Hi, Mr. Boache, can you hear me?
Hi, I can hear you, Evans.
Fantastic. We just had a reaction from Dr. Simatia. What's your reaction to the Heritage Fund conversation? Government says you're going to amend the law so we can touch it.
Yeah, Evans, I think we are not in ordinary times. The times we're in requires urgent decisions and also to see where we can raise funding to solve the problems that confronts our country. This is a global situation and countries are reacting in various forms. But I think in the midst of that, we shouldn't forget the fact that we live as a country as though there is no tomorrow. We have laws that ensure that we save to be able to mitigate some of these challenges when they come. And that is why when we're passing the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, we put in place mechanisms such as the Stabilization Fund and the Heritage Fund. The essence of the Stabilization Fund was to ensure that when you have budget deficit arising from unforeseen circumstances, you could fall on the Stabilization Fund to cushion or smoothen your plan for the year. And we have consistently highlighted that we were not building enough buffer in the fund to mitigate any shock that arises. We had experience in 2014. We couldn't mitigate it. And we kept pushing that we need to build enough buffer in the Stabilization Fund so that we'll be able to withstand any shock when they come. Again, the TRMA provides that when you cut the Stabilization Fund, the excess of the fund should go into contingency funding and debt servicing. We have deliberately forgotten about the contingency fund. And if a country cannot have funds available to address emerging challenges, then we are not being serious, really. So, and that is why we are where we are today. We have a contingency fund that is depleted, and therefore we are rushing to see where else we can get money to address our challenges. But what I think we should be doing is to begin to address our collective failure in planning for some of these things, cut our expenditure, and ensure that into the future we will be able to plan properly. And not to say, for example, that people are being laid off, they don't have jobs, and therefore they should go to sleep for their pension. And that is exactly what we're trying to do. To say that we are in a difficult moment and therefore we should just attack the Heritage Fund would mean that we are so much in a dire situation that we just have to go for our pension. I don't think we are in that critical situation.
Are we not, really? I mean, Ben, are we not in a dire, unprecedented, facing a challenge of our lives? The entire globe is in unprecedented times. If unprecedented times we all agree we are in, doesn't it require unprecedented measures? I get the point. We haven't put enough money into the Stabilization Fund, the contingency fund. I get it. But where we are right now, some may argue it's not a time to say, had we known, this is where we are. Let's deal with the tools that are available to us now to fix the problem. We can have the conversation about, we told you so, but now touch the Heritage Fund, if you may, to save lives and save jobs.
No, but even if you look at the budget or the statement that was presented to Parliament yesterday, already the minister has been able to cut the Stabilization Fund below the current 300 million. He says he's putting at 100 million. So he has excess of 200 million to cream up. That is twice the amount required for the mitigation plan for addressing the COVID-19 situation. Already, corporate bodies are, jumping in. Citizens are jumping in, and I think we have to look beyond the stabilization fund to ask ourselves, where else can we raise money to be able to address the challenges that confront our country? Even in the budget, I'm not seeing plans for the utilization of what the corporate world is trying to support the country with, and how Ghana is going to really galvanize effort and be transparent about those efforts to ensure that we are not just quoting numbers to get approval from Parliament to address problems that all of us collectively are contributing to addressing. I don't think we are at that critical point where we're saying that we don't have any other solution but to attack the Heritage Fund. But our primary target now should be the budget. Where can we cut? The roads have not been done for how many years now? If we are not able to do it this year, nothing will go amiss.
I'm going to come to
just where we need to cut.
Yes, I'm going to come to that shortly. I'm going to come to the where can we cut, if not from the Heritage Fund. Stay with me, Ben. Stay with me, Dr. Mati. I want to bring in the politicians in Parliament. They are on the Finance Committee. They will have to approve this. I want to bring in Mr. Adongo on this. Mr. Adongo, will you approve this?
Well, good evening to you and to your panelists. Unfortunately, I am not in Parliament because I've had to rush to my constituency over the same coronavirus issues. And I am not sure. It will depend on when it will come on the floor, but I'm likely to be there before Parliament rises. But I just want to say that this is a time that the Finance Minister and this government require all the support that they can get from all of us, because we have a collective challenge on our hands. And therefore, whether you are in the minority, you are in civil society or majority, the focus ought to be how do we collectively rally around a solution to this problem. And so on that score, I believe that the minority in that spirit will do everything that is reasonable in order to support the Finance Minister and get us out of this. Now, but having said that, we have to critically look at some of the solutions that are being proposed and to see whether there are alternatives to these solutions and to see how we can assist the Finance Minister find those solutions that may be more workable, but still safeguard the integrity of our fiscal system going forward. I say this because, like my honorable colleagues have already said, the main purpose of the stabilization fund was essentially to build buffers towards situations like this. And we needed to look at the size of the economy on an ongoing basis and to look at the growth in the oil revenues that were coming after we moved from one, FPSO to about 3, and began to bask in a lot of revenue that were coming because we're now producing more and prices were favorable to us. We needed to understand that then posed a bigger vulnerability to the economy, and we needed to up the buffers that were required to deal with this matter. Unfortunately, we stayed in the comfort zone of creating a stabilization fund of 300 million. And the question then is, if we come to a situation where we need to take drastic measures, have we built enough buffers? In my view, the contingency fund may not be the main issue if we have built enough buffers in the stabilization fund. The reason is simple. The stabilization fund itself finds its roots, as my colleague said, into the contingency fund and the sinking fund. Now, the biggest challenge we have had is that there are clear rules governing the utilization of the contingency fund. So in a situation like this, what the law provides is that you will need to submit to the Finance Committee of Parliament with a clear program of the challenges that we are confronted with and what clear emergency situation we are dealing with, and to provide a clear demonstration of the utilization of this funding in a more transparent manner, and for the Finance Committee of Parliament to scrutinize and approve the releases that you need to deal with this matter. So what that means is that you would have to move the money from the stabilization fund. So even if you hadn't built the contingency fund, but you had built enough buffers in the stabilization fund, say about $1 billion, you can easily move about $700 million into the contingency fund, appear before the Finance Committee of Parliament as per the requirements of the Public Financial Management Act to present a program that will allow you to deal with the challenges that we're having in the emergency. Now, Finance Committee will have approved that out of the contingency fund for you to utilize and to report back to Parliament and then justify how you have utilized the money. So you see that the safeguards for the utilization of the stabilization fund through the contingency fund are so stringent and transparent that they allow the country to have a proper view of the challenge that we are dealing with. Now, when we have consistently just lowered the capping, it means that we have found a way to escape the scrutiny of moving the money into a contingency fund and treating whatever flows that are coming out as a mere part of either a sinking fund or a financing of the budget without the appropriate safeguards that were envisaged by the Petroleum Revenue Management Act and by extension the Public Financial Management Act that then establishes the contingency fund and the sinking fund and builds around it the transparency and the governance arrangement for the utilization of this money. So we have had a challenge over the years when we have not critically looked at the size of the economy, the size of the petroleum revenues that are coming in, and by implication, the level of vulnerability that we might be preparing for based on the size of our economy. Today, we are having $300 million to deal with a gap of $9.3 billion. That is obviously a collective failure of our own fiscal management of our petroleum revenue. Now, the next 10 is, we will deal with that later. But for now, how do we assist the finance minister to circumvent this situation?
So to the
my
big
view,
question. To the
my
big
view
question.
is that we need to look at our expenditure, and that is what using the stabilization through the contingency would have offered Parliament. Then Finance Committee would have said, isn't it the case that already a lot of our expenditures that we envisage are being suspended? Because now schools are on vacation, children are at home. How much cost savings are we making from the educational sector and for the cost of running our schools? Now, the question would have been, isn't it the case that you were running a deficit because you were borrowing a substantial amount of money to fund recurrent expenditure that is now being suspended? Isn't it the case that you were budgeting for a huge goods and services budget, which is discretionary anyway, to support an expenditure that you will now not be spending? Can you tell us how you are going to be able to then realistically say that I don't need these goods and services, realistically say that as a result of the actions that we have taken in order to deal with the coronavirus, we are already making certain cost savings? And if all this is going to bring down the borrowing that would have done to finance the budget, how much of that additional borrowing did we program to impact the cost of our interest payment that we are making? If you put all that together and you take it out, how much are we realistically saving? And how much do we really need to give you, Finance Minister, to deal with this matter? Now, that level of scrutiny is being denied because we are basically simply saying that we want to just touch some money, but we don't want to follow the governance and the control systems that are built into that system by simply lowering it and not moving the money where you'll be required the public financial management system to be transparent with the representatives of the people so that they are comfortable to say that based on this transparency and all that you have done, we basically think that you need money.
Yeah, I mean, just hold on for me. I'm going to come back and interrogate that. Just a second. Give me a second. I want to bring in Achimabwaji on this one.
Fund because you see,
I'll come back to the Heritage Fund question very shortly, but I want to bring in Achimabwaji. Just a second, Ms. Adongo. But Achimabwaji, so you've heard the concerns by ASEP, by Steve Matial, by Adongo. There's a general support and understanding that we are in, unprecedented times. But the key question that I guess all I've asked is, instead of just jumping to the Heritage Fund, what cutting measures are you introducing to meet the challenges of today? They say it's not enough to just go dip your hands into the Heritage Fund and other places and ask for more when you are not cutting enough. So explain that to us. Well, what are the cutting measures?
Hear you, please.
Hello, Mr.
Hello?
Chimabaji.
Yeah, I didn't hear the question.
Sorry, this is for Mr. Chimabaji. Just a second, yes.
Adongo was taught to speak.
Hello, Daniel Chimabaji, can you hear me?
I think Honorable Adongo, you were stopped for a while, but
yes. So the question is to you.
Okay, so Evans, can you do me a favor and repeat it, because I really couldn't hear you.
The question is,
if you can get
what is government cutting now to meet the extraordinary demands of the time, instead of simply dipping your hands into Heritage Fund and other places to take money? What are we cutting?
Evans, let me say good evening to you and your listeners, and also good evening to the people on this panel, and then, of course, to my good people in Baltimore constituency. Evans, I think I would like to make a few comments before I come straight to your question, because I believe that the leadership that the MPP government, President Akufo-Addo, is providing in response to this global crisis needs to be commended. And I believe that the measures that have been outlined ever since we started hearing from the president has been helpful. That said, Ivan, what we are trying to do as a government that has responsibility, what we are trying to do as a people, part of the globe, what we are trying to do is to provide and respond to the crisis that is before us now. And for that reason, government will do whatever it takes to ensure that lives are protected, to ensure that we are safe, we are able to continue and sustain our lives, and that even if we suffer a lot of losses, consequences, economically, socially, the result of this COVID-19, with time and life, we will rebound. So if we are talking about the Heritage Fund, which, like my Honorable Adongo said, is probably okay, as long as we can, in the future, regardless of the challenges that various governments have gone through and not complying fully, as Dr. Mathieu was trying to say, the Heritage Fund can be rebuilt. It can be rebuilt. He made mention of the fact that at any least problem, we are running to Heritage Fund. I don't think it can be described as least. It is not. Like the president said, we are not in ordinary. Yes, we are not. And for that reason, we cannot do things just ordinary. We have to actually ensure that if it means that is one of the sources we can get the money to help deal with the issue of virus, then it has to be done. We are also going to try to assess any additional funding we can get, wherever we can get it from the IMF, struck credit facility, from what you call the World Bank facility, the IDA facility. We are trying to assess about $35 million. I think it's before Parliament, the report is ready. And so are we also going to look at expenditure measures? What can we postpone? What can we delay? What savings can we get? Because when you have to reprioritize, you have to choose what makes sense.
Yeah, but Mr. Chimabaji, you haven't given me the specifics. So you're talking about what cuts can you make, etc. I'm asking specifically, what are we cutting?
Evans, I believe when you started this program, you mentioned a number of fiscal programs or measures that have been taken. You mentioned revenue impact. that is going to be affected somewhat. 50, about 5 billion Ghana cedis as a result of the drop in oil prices.
Yeah, I mean, we know all that. We appreciate that. Isn't that why the focus should be first on, as a government, what can we cut? What sacrifices can government itself make to accommodate?
I was just coming to that point.
Yeah, if we can get that to be quickly, then I can bring other people on. Yes.
Have been done. Expenditure. It's been looked at specifically so that we can ensure that as much as we know the revenues are not coming, we have to delay implementation of, for instance, infrastructure development. It will be considered. Hello?
I can hear you.
You're very hello, so I can't hear everything you say. I just struggle getting all the questions, please.
Okay, let me bring in Ben Boachi on this whilst you try and get that line corrected. Ben, right. on a question of what can be cut, I see in what the finance minister sent to Parliament that he's going to adjust expenditure on goods and services and capers downwards by 1.2 billion. Is that not enough?
No, I think we can look more to the specifics and see how much more we can cut. Like I mentioned, it's not an ordinary time. And therefore, if you have to save lives by sacrificing projects, then you have to do that. And I think that should be the focus right now. And also, how do we galvanize the whole country to contribute? Everywhere in the world, companies are contributing, individuals are contributing, and the country is also cutting to contribute to fixing the challenge that we have on our hands. And I think that's where the focus really needs to be. Also recognizing the fact that that future insurance is so relevant, because the Heritage Fund is not just, when we talk about the future, it's not just for people who will be born for the sake of being born in the future, but it's also a budgetary support for the future government. So in future, when we don't have oil, the Heritage Fund then becomes the fund that generates revenue to support the budget. So it is an important fund that should exist and not to be attacked because we have challenges today that we can fix if we really want to do the austere cutting that we really have to cut at this point to support the budget. Okay.
Steve Mattel, so we have to cut. If we have to cut, where do we cut if what they propose is not enough?
Right, to be sincere, we have an over-bloated bureaucratic budget. If this country, a poor country like Ghana, can afford this number of ministers and deputies, not to talk about the multiple deputy directorships created in almost all the parastatals, Petroleum Commission, Minerals Commission, Ghana Water, Metro Mass, name it. It's huge cost to the nation. For me, that is the first target I would head for if I was in charge of affairs.
Let me bring in Mr. Adongo. Mr. Adongo, you were going to touch on the Heritage Fund. On that question, is it prudent?
Well, I just think that from the best practice that we learned, from Norway and Denmark, they built these buffers over years. It doesn't mean that the economies didn't come under strain. And it's a simple reason why we provided a special vehicle to deal with it. Heritage Fund was not envisaged to be one of the vehicles for dealing with this challenge. In any case, $500 million will work up to approximately 2.8, 2.9 billion Ghana cedis. It's basically not worth it to deplete it because it just won't solve the problem. But then at this moment in time, chances are we'll be depleting Heritage Fund to fund consumption because we really do not know what exactly is now driving the budget after we are doing the cut. So we could actually be spending future generations' money on things that to us now and also to the future. Now, we need to ask very critical questions. And the trajectory of our budget last couple of years gives us a better indication. In 2017, we budgeted for about 6.3 billion for. We did about 4.7 billion. That was actually 1.6 billion off, particularly from just the budget of CAPEX. In 2018, I think we budgeted for somewhere around almost 7.5 billion. We ended up doing 6.3. Last year, we budgeted for 8.5 billion of capital expenditure. We just did 6.3, which means that about 1.2 billion is off. Now, from this trajectory, it is clear that the capital expenditure budget of 9.5 billion is overly ambitious. And we can actually shave off about 2.5 billion of that, and we'll be actually on course to achieving what is the realistic budget. Now, this 2.5 that you are cutting, there is a goods and services budget that has been put in the budget to deliver this. How much is that? So if you take that off, you are basically saving money that is more than the Heritage Fund that you want to touch. So it is about being very realistic and now looking at your program and the period that we have left to the end of the year to say, can we realistically deliver what we are programming? And where can we then cut and deliver value to the people?
Adongo, on goods
are we really going to achieve
just a quick point.
interest cost budget that we have put there?
The finance minister announced in Parliament that they're adjusting expenditure on goods and services and CAPEX downwards, and it's going to save us 1.2 billion. Isn't that enough?
And I'm saying that you are putting two items together. I'm saying the historical trajectory, we can actually save 2.5 billion on CAPEX alone. What it means is that if a CAPEX of 7 billion, that would be a massive improvement over the last 3 years. And that would have saved us about 2.5 billion, only CAPEX alone. So if you now add the savings that you make on your goods and services to deliver the 2.5 CAPEX that you are taking off, you probably are looking at something close to 3.5 billion on CAPEX and goods and services alone. And so I'm saying that we are still programming and being too optimistic about our CAPEX budget, and for which reason we are programming for an optimistic goods and services to support a CAPEX that will not be delivering. In the process, we are denying allocations to critical services and programs. And I'm saying that in as much as we want to support the finance minister to get out of this problem, we need to actually take a very critical look of the cost drivers and to see where we can actually make realistic savings in order that we are able to save more than is required on the Heritage Fund. And I do believe that there is enough opportunity in the budget to save up to 4 to 5 billion without necessarily touching the Heritage Fund.
Okay, so Heritage Fund is a no for you?
No, I don't think so, because, Ivan, the fact that we put in the Heritage Fund doesn't mean that we will not face headwinds in our journey. But it simply meant that we were willing as a country to stay together and deal with the matters that will come up so that we can build a Heritage Fund that we find in Norway and other places, which today can provide just 4% of that to fund the entire budget in terms of just the interest earning alone. If this is what we want to leave for our future generations, then we might tighten our belt in difficult times. And I do believe that we all agree that these are not normal times, and the finance minister needs all the support he can get from all of us, and we want to assist him to find the appropriate niches to cut the appropriate
Let me bring in Mr. Chumabaji. Yes, you were making a point earlier, and in terms of...
I believe if you look at the budget, so to say specifically, we are talking about three main components, probably for some we can cut, some we cannot. We are looking at goods and services, we look at opportunities that we can have to cut. We are looking at compensation, obviously, if the opportunities there as well, and then the infrastructure. But Evans, let me say this. We do not at this moment know the exact, so to say, how long or how much this impact is going to be, because of the fact that there's still, number of variables that keep changing. We don't even know how long we may have to deal with it. All right? And let's also not forget about the fact that even though, yes, we want to cut, after coronavirus, what happens? I heard my senior Dr. Mateo also raised the issue of number of ministers. The opportunity to cut, why not? But don't forget, when this is over, we will still still require a certain number of people to still ensure that we can at least try to recover some of the loss we are experiencing as a result of the partial lockdown, as a result of this COVID-19 and all that. And the fact that government expenditure by itself is also, what do you call it, an injector in the economic growth. Now we are talking about some projections of GDP growth, whether it's going to drop from almost 7% down to as much as 1.25 nowadays. How do we, after we are done, the government, deal with it? We have to inject, we have to ensure that we are able to create a lot more economic activities by providing bailouts and other things to be able to stimulate the economy, grow again. All those things may not necessarily lead to cutting government expenditure, which happens to be an injector in economic growth. So, like the President said, I would say, like, we are not in ordinary times. We are dealing with the issues as they come. Government is doing its best to deal with this issue. We have timelines in terms of short term, what do you have to do, the medium term, what do you have to do, and the long term. And like you said, I sincerely believe that this one, regardless of what it is also going to pass. And we'll be able to deal with it and rebound. Well, because as we speak, now it's also a test for us as a country, our ability to sustain ourselves in times like this. A test for family and companies' ability to continue, as in the case of companies, as going concern. Families, how sustainable are we? If we were to stay home, or if we were to stay home for about a month, what is going to happen?
Yeah.
How do you support people? How can private companies continue to pay their employees when funds are not coming? Don't forget, part of the measures is to even hold the payment of principal on loans. So these are all measures, and they are deep. How do we, after this COVID is over, rebound with a lot of economic...
Well, I guess that is the point. That is why civil society and others are making the point. If you're looking down the line after COVID-19, the Heritage Fund will come in handy. But if you deplete it now, after COVID-19, what next? We'll return after the break. Stay with us. And thank you for staying with us. I want to quickly wrap up with Benjamin Boache and Dr. Steve Martial. Benjamin, a quick reaction and just a minute each. Reduction of the proportion of the net carried and participation interest due GMPC from 30 to 15%, and also the lowering the cap on the Ghana Stabilization Fund from the current 300 million to 100 million. Your quick reaction to that?
No, I think we don't have a choice with the stabilization funds, because that is what that is supposed to do, to actually stabilize the budget. I mean, the minister can go for it and get approval, even if they have to exhaust it and think into the future how we can build enough buffer to offset some of these challenges. For GMPC, we have to look at the numbers really carefully to see how it impacts on their operations, and also even taking care of their recurrent expenditure. But one quick important thing, if we track the budget from 2017 to 2019, the annual budget funding amount has always been has always had an outstanding balance, which for our last count was about $1 billion Ghana cedis. And I think this is the point that we have to really account for that money, to see how that can also do to support the budget. We don't know where that $1 billion is, and I think this is the appropriate time that we need to account for that $1 billion Ghana to see how support it can support the budget.
Dr. Martial, 15 seconds. What do you say to the GMPC question?
Well, Evans, I'm not too sure what informed the 15% cut from GMPC's allocation. But I take cognizance of the fact that GMPC will have equity financing obligations, which are often not negotiable. Yeah. And again, it has its own operational budget and all that.
So is it a good thing or not? Do you support it
already?
Is it a good one or not?
No, it's not a straightforward matter of whether or not you support it. But in terms of the thinking, I'm not too sure whether the amount will suffice GMPC's budgetary needs, especially given the fact that GMPC is already being capped under the earmark funds capping rule. So the 15% will further be capped at 25% if that law, but we have not been told that that law has been suspended.
Yeah. Okay.
So that put GMPC in a very precarious situation. But before you go, even, let me also make the point that a lot of the misgivings we have arise out of mistrust. As we speak, government has not been able to account for as much as 650 million Ghana cedis of annual budget funding amount. How can we trust this government with the heritage fund?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's a big question. I'm grateful, Dr. Martial, grateful, Benjamin Boache, Mr. Dongo, and Mr. Chimaboache. Enjoy the rest of your evening.